From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And in today's lineup, K-State's Dan O'Brien offering his thoughts on the importance of that G20 summit meeting toward resolving the trade dispute between the U.S. and China. That one of his main talking points during his weekly segment on the grain market trends. Then we'll meet the members of the K-State Crops team, which just locked up another national championship in the Collegiate Crops Contests earlier this month. Jayden Meyer, Ryan and Wes Jennings will talk about the work that went into K-State securing that national title. They'll be joined by their coach, K-State's Kevin Donnelly. And awaiting to chat with us about Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp. All this and more straight ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Welcome. As for starters, we get into the grain market scene and tap the thoughts of grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension Dan O'Brien from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas, as to what's going on of late in the grain trades. And Dan, if we were to single out an attention getter this week, it would likely have to be what's going on or what may happen at that G20 summit taking place as we speak now in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and what the grain markets are watching in particular, and most especially the soybean market. The discussions expected to take place between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping on resolving the trade dispute between the two countries, or at least moving in a direction to some sort of resolution. At this hour, nothing definitive going on there, but for sure the soybean sector is eager for some positive indication of some sort from that meeting, and the sorghum market as well.
Yes, when you take a close look at what's been happening in soybean exports out of the U.S., here for the week ending November 22nd, we actually shipped about 38 million bushels worth of soybeans. We need about 36.5 to meet the USDA's latest projection. That's at 1.9 billion bushels. Of course, that was dropped by about 200 or 300 million bushels in the last 1 or 2 reports. But still, if we had a full year of uninterrupted exports, we'd be on pace to meet the USDA's, albeit lowered projection. Total sales for the rest of this new crop marketing year are about 855 million bushels. That's about 45%. That's USDA's projection. And here we're about 12 weeks in, or about 23%. So just from that point of view, you could say, well, gosh, that looks decent. Like we're not seeing the strong pace that we've seen generally in during times like this. When during times like this, when we were going really well export wise, we'd see double our current pace. Gosh, at 80 to 100 million bushels a week. And so, if there's anything that's kind of masking the flow for soybeans, it's that whereas China would come in and purchase ahead quite a bit, there seems to be now more of a buyer's market mentality for the other buyers, and they're buying more hand to mouth. So anyway, I think the point is that if there were some resolution to this trade conflict between the U.S. and China, then a good amount of hope to the soybean market in terms of export strength that we could have and would, quote, help a lot. When you look at where the futures closed yesterday, January soybeans at 887, November 2019, the next crop contract, 933. So that's about 55, 60 cents differential. We don't see anything on the horizon yet for problems in South America for their crop. It's got a variety of factors to work through, and in all of those issues, the negative would be that for coming in soybeans would be a large South American crop, just piling right on to what we've got now. That would be a negative price-wise. A positive would be the possibility of U.S. ag producers cutting back soybean acres domestically enough that you could affect at least our domestic market heading off into fall. With those acreage decisions for corn and soybeans and all these crops on the docket here, we're thinking that, gosh, we could have lower soybean acres. If we don't have some resolution to this U.S.-China conflict, then the prospect of markedly lower U.S. soybean acres in 2019 becomes more and more real. And those acres are going to go somewhere. And right now, when you look around at which commodities are doing well in terms of exports and general prices or not, we see corn doing really pretty good right now for exports. So probably a likelihood that we'd see an increase in corn acres. We're seeing for grain sorghum a shifting of usage to more domestic uses as again, this conflict between the U.S. and China has certainly affected grain sorghum exports, and we're struggling to meet the USDA's goals. The wheat market outlook is kind of a bizarre set of circumstances to consider in that here we have our own overall U.S. wheat exports and hard red also struggling at the moment anyway in terms of movement. There's reports coming out of Kansas wheat organizations of improving prospects for price competitiveness, and that would be a great thing. We certainly would look for those signals to help on the immediate movement and the forward purchases. At this time, though, in the last several weeks, we've been struggling quite a bit in terms of wheat exports. Europe is struggling, too, to meet their export goals. You have a number of these issues around the world in terms of what's happening in terms of the wheat, yet the wheat market has been, at least the U.S. export market and some of these others, have been struggling price-wise. So how do you bring all that together? I think that we've seen just enough years of success in a row all over the world, even in the importing countries, that there just isn't an impetus yet to run in buy wheat to fill domestic needs. They've got enough at this time.
Total conjecture here, Dan, but if somehow the Chinese-U.S. trade dispute is resolved, or at least progress is made to a substantial extent here in the relative near term, would that, to describe it this way, blow the lid off of particularly the soybean market, and talking in terms of large leaps upward?
I think that there would be a short-run response and then a long-run issue to have to contend with. The short-run response would be that you would see business from the Chinese looking towards whatever they could get out of the U.S., so there'd be certainly some improvement and some positiveness happening in the soybean market. The losers out of that would be the Brazilians, whose $2 price advantage per bushel, $2 or more, would be eroded. So in the short run, it would sure affect us. I do think in the long run, again, this time, just as back in the Carter years, using of ag commodities by different countries as they trade back and forth as a political weapon drives the buying countries to invest elsewhere and to diversify their risk in terms of where they buy grain from. This has been a big signal, I think, to buying countries to make sure they're not vulnerable to the same situation again. So in the long run, I think you end up and develop overseas suppliers of these crops, or they start shifting internally to other sources of protein to meet their domestic livestock and food consumption needs.
A quick nod here, if we might then, Dan, to new projections updated from the USDA on corn and wheat production in this upcoming year. You've had a look at those numbers. They're covered in your notes this week. What do you see there of interest?
A little bit surprising. The corn numbers, even though acreage is projected to be up about 2.8 million acres of corn, and yields at about 176.5 million bushels, about 14.3 billion bushels corn crop here in the U.S. Still, the usage numbers are projected to be strong enough that really the USDA is projecting that the total use is actually a little higher next year, about 15.2, ending stocks down below 1.5 billion bushels, stocks to use down below 10, prices that are now sitting at about $3.60 for an average price, actually higher to $3.90 or $4. For that to come true, given a successful crop, you've got to have usage stay pretty strong. So strong ethanol usage, strong exports, strong feed usage, what's being relied on for that USDA projection to come through. So we'll see. And for wheat, really not a lot of change. Actually, just about as sideways, steady as you go. Stock situation, stocks to use just a little bit lower. They project the current price for this marketing year at $5.10, for the next one $5.20. So it looks to me like the wheat projection for next year is pretty much steady as you go. Really, probably their worry in that will be, again, as they wrestle with the question of where do U.S. wheat exports go. Mm-hmm. And unless there's a recovery in this, then folks will just be taking a hard look at where our supply-demand balance sheets will be heading to, and what type of economic incentives, i.e. prices, are we giving U.S. ag producers to grow wheat. We really do need to see an improvement in exports, or we end up and bring about some restructuring in the crops that we grow in these parts of the world.
All right, then. And again, we invite producers to take full advantage of the information that Dan puts together in his weekly notes on the grain markets, and those are right there for your viewing at agmanager.info out of K-State Agricultural Economics. Dan, enjoy your weekend. Many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien there with his weekly glance at the grain market trends. He is a grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension. On a related note, Dan's fellow agricultural economists at K-State have just put out now the 2019 Farm Management Guides for irrigated and non-irrigated crops. Those were posted earlier this week. Fresh information. Producers, we'd urge you to take full advantage of those guides. You can link to them at agmanager.info as well. After the break, we'll have Mike Side, the 3 K-State students who carried on the legacy of success at the National Collegiate Crops Contests just a few days back. They brought home the hardware again as the dynasty continues. We'll visit with them and their coach in a few moments here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you back, and we bring once again good news from the Department of Agronomy here at Kansas State University, and its crops team just finished off another national championship, and in fact the members that we speak with today swept the top individual awards at the 2 contests which lead to that championship. Their coach is K-State agronomist Kevin Donnelly. And Kevin, congratulations to you and your group for, once more, an astounding achievement and ongoing level of excellence.
Well, thank you, Eric. We certainly had a good run this year, had a real strong team, and the evidence of that, I guess, is how they placed. We did have some good competition. It's probably as good a competition across the board from the top 4 schools as we've had, but we had really good balance this year, and these guys worked hard to get where they're at. So.
And K-State's teams have now won this Collegiate Crops Contest, 16 of the past 20 years?
Correct, yes. So our streak is, I guess, sort of legendary at this point, but I tell them at the start of the year, you guys don't want to be the group that breaks a streak, so it's easy for me. That's good motivation. So
you've been involved in this so many years. How do you maintain a dynasty of this nature? Because the competition is keen.
Well, I think it's a matter of the pride that we have in the success. And so, I have the advantage of working with the introductory class in agronomy. So I must say I'll target some of the top students in there that seem to be on their game, and so I'd sometimes twist a few arms to get them involved.
And explain, before we talk with the young people who actually did the heavy lifting here, what the contests are about. There are 3 key phases, right?
Correct, yes. We have plant and seed identification. That's a list of about 250, 275 plants and seeds that they need to know. There's a seed analysis part, which would be picking through a sample to identify noxious weeds and other crops, similar to what would be done in a seed purity analysis for seed certification. And then the third part is commercial grain grading, which is again, looking through a sample and picking out foreign materials and damages to assign a grade, like U.S. number 2 yellow corn. So there's 3 parts that are sort of different. Really have to know those seeds very, not only just a panful of them, but an individual seed that they pick out of a sample.
And then they go through the paces at 2 different contests.
Correct. The events are the same. It's just sponsored by the American Roll in Kansas City, and then the CME Group Chicago Board of Trade, formerly, that sponsors it in Chicago. So these have been going on. Actually, Chicago was the 90th time that this contest has been held there. So it's related to the Board of Trade and the grain grading through that aspect.
Well, let's meet the young people who comprised the winning team this year. They are Wes Jennings from Abilene, a junior in agronomy, Luke Ryan from Solomon, a sophomore in agronomy, and Jayden Meyer of Athol, who is a sophomore in agricultural economics. Jayden, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in this.
Yeah, so I come from a farming background, and so I've always had a love of agriculture growing up and into high school and into college. And I'd say I first got interested in the K-State Crops team during high school. I was involved in the FFA agronomy contest, and I was quite successful in that. And I first met Dr. Donnelly through that contest and first learned about the crops team on the horizon back then. And so I've been interested in it for quite a while. And, of course, I didn't realize quite the number of hours that would go into it and quite the amount of work, but it's definitely taught me a lot of very important lessons.
And, Luke, same question to you.
Yeah, so I also grew up on a farm, from a farm background, and the interesting crops that sparked me was from 4-H and in the crops project in 4-H. And then when I came to Kansas State, I actually had no idea that this contest was a thing. And then Dr. D approached me after class one day and was like, you should come try it out. And so, yeah, it really sparked my interest, and it was a lot of fun doing it.
And Wes?
Yeah, so I had kind of the same story, I guess, as Jayden. I came from a family farm background just south of Abilene, Kansas, and I was involved in the FFA agronomy contest as well. Yeah, I'd say it definitely teaches us great lessons, and the ID will be useful in the field at some point in each of our careers.
So share some stories about the workouts and the preparation. As suggested here, it's not light duty. There's some hours put into this.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of hours as far as fitting it into your schedule and prioritizing it to make sure that you keep caught up and don't fall behind. And it definitely teaches you a lot of patience and determination. And it's not always easy. And sometimes you put in the hours and you think you did a lot better, but then you just did about the same. And it just takes a lot of hours and a lot of time and hard work and determination to improve throughout and be consistent and do well.
So how do workouts actually work? We know about judging teams and that they look at different classes of livestock. Say, how do you go about honing your skills in seed identification, seed analysis, so forth?
We try to finish a whole competition set for one competition in a week, and then we kind of bump it up as we get closer to the competition time. And one competition is about 4.5 hours, so we definitely put at least that many hours in a week.
In essence, going through a mock competition then, so you get a feel for the pressure.
Mm-hmm.
What about the pressure, Wes?
Yeah, like Dr. D talked about it earlier. It's one of those things where I guess you don't want to be the group that doesn't get first place that year. So, yeah, there's a ton of preparation. I'd say, personally, I probably spent 10 to 12 hours in the crops lab per week, and most of that time is outside of our Thursday night practice that we designated for the whole team. So, yeah, I would definitely say there's a lot of preparation that goes into it.
Well, for the record, at Chicago, Wes was the first place individual overall. Kansas City, Jayden was the top individual overall, but each of you placed 1, 2, 3 in both of the contests. And that's a pretty rare feat, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say we had a really strong team this year, and it was kind of, on any given day, it was just kind of whichever one of us had the better day was going to win the contest.
Let's visit a bit about what each of you gained from this experience. And 2 of you are studying agronomy. 1 is studying agricultural economics, so we might turn to him and ask Jayden, how will this help you as you pursue an ag econ line of study?
Yeah, so with that ag econ degree, I actually plan on returning to the farm and farming full-time after graduation. And I'm doing an agronomy minor as well. And so overall, I think this is definitely going to help me out a tremendous amount on the farm, especially with plant and seed identification and being able to walk out in a field or a pasture and identify any weeds or any plants that are growing there that I may or may not want. Also, the grain grading aspect is going to help as well, just during harvest and whenever we're moving grain, being able to look at a sample of grain and see if there's anything that sticks out as far as something that would lower the grade or something that doesn't look right, and what kind of an effect that would have on the price that we could potentially receive for that.
And Luke, what are your career aspirations, and how would the contest experience help you?
Yeah, so I plan on, after graduating, going to be a crop scout. I think not just the plant and seed identification, that will definitely help, but I think overall the whole contest, the attention to detail that you have to do in every part is really going to help, because one little mistake can make you lose a lot of points in the contest. And so you learn to look for the little things, and I think that's really going to help out in the field.
Wes?
For me, I think my short-term plans is to get a job out of college somewhere close to home around the central Kansas area. Hopefully at some point in the future I'd like to return to the farm as well. But I think this competition has implications in each of our career fields, mainly in the identification aspect. And that's something that as I hone those skills in a future job someday, I can probably take that back to the family farm as well. And so that'll help with both sides.
Kevin, you are always proud of your crops teams, but you're likely a little extra so with this one because of what it accomplished. The national championship, sweeping the top individual awards. That has happened twice in the 85-year history of the events, both times achieved by K-State.
Right. So, yes, this is a strong group. And I would also add that we have had a very strong alternate team as well. We had a regional contest, and that's kind of where we picked who would go on, but we had several students, Noah and Nate and Madison and Blake, that are in behind these guys, and they're all actually have another year of eligibility. So
they're in the queue, aren't they?
That's right. And so the carrot here was that these guys did earn, in addition to scholarship awards at Chicago, they have an opportunity now to go to Australia next fall. The American Society of Agronomy, we have a grant program through them that sponsors them. So everybody was kind of, I think, a little motivation of our own team, and it wound up being, pretty competitive among our team just to make the team this year. So we're going to recognize our alternates who really did well. Hopefully some of our alternates from this year will come back next year as well.
We'll quickly mention those alternates by name. Nate Dick of Inman, Noah Winans of Tekonsha, Minnesota, Madison Tennell of Olathe, as well as Blake Kirchhoff of Hardy, Nebraska. So congratulations to them as well. But certainly congratulations to the three of you for this great accomplishment, and we wish you well in your pursuits from here forward. And Kevin, thanks to you as well.
You bet.
Along with us, the crops team for K-State 2018, coming off, as of this past week and a half, the national championship. They've been joined by their coach, Kevin Donnelly, K-State agronomist. And once again, our hats off to Wes Jennings of Abilene, junior in agronomy, Luke Ryan of Solomon, a sophomore in agronomy, and Jayden Meyer of Athol, a sophomore in agricultural economics. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up next, to look at today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, a framework for the 2018 Farm Bill has been agreed upon by House and Senate Agriculture Committee leaders. But what's next in getting this measure approved and signed into law? The USDA's Rod Bain takes a look.
The word Thursday morning from House and Senate Ag Committee leaders, an agreement in principle on a new farm bill. But as leaders noted in a statement, there is still much work to do to get a 2018 farm bill in the books by the end of the year. While full details of the bill will be made available in coming days, Rob LaRue of the National Farmers Union notes,
it all comes down to money.
Yet Senate Ag Committee Chair Pat Roberts previously said cost analysis would be an important step towards full agreement. Currently, the Congressional Budget Office is scoring the bill's cost. Also, legal and report language is being finalized on the bill. Then there is the time factor, with this latest session of Congress set to conclude by mid-December. But Will Roger of the American Farm Bureau Federation are among those who believe a farm bill will be adopted by year's end because
the sense of urgency is there
to have it in place for America's ag producers. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The U.S.-China trade tensions and the tariffs deployed on U.S. products like soybeans are showing up now in more USDA outlooks, with forecast U.S. agricultural exports for fiscal year 2019 now at $141.5 billion. That's down from an August outlook of $144.5 billion. Soybean export volumes down because of declining Chinese purchases from the United States as a result of trade issues and as a record U.S. crop continues to pressure soybean prices lower. That's what the USDA said in its outlook for U.S. agricultural trade. The agency detailed that oilseed and product exports are forecast at $27.9 billion. That would be down $2.3 billion from August on lower soybean export volume and value. Declining China soybean purchases from the U.S. pushing U.S. export volumes lower. China expected to source its soybean imports primarily from South America, says the USDA. Soybeans, though not the only crop where China is tabbed, as the USDA noted that grain sorghum exports are lowered $300 million to $500 million on a slower export pace with the loss of the Chinese market. As for imports, the USDA raised its outlook for fiscal 19 to $127 billion, up from their August forecast of $126.5 billion. The new mark, however, would not be a record. That was set in fiscal year 18. The result, then, is a forecast agricultural trade surplus of just $14.5 billion. That's down from $18 billion forecast back in August, and the fiscal year 18 result of $15.8 billion. The fiscal year 19 result would be the smallest trade surplus since fiscal year of 2007. And the EPA is expected to release a final level of 19.9 billion gallons for biofuels in 2019 under the Renewable Fuel Standard. That would be up slightly from their proposed level of 19.8 billion gallons, according to a report from Reuters. This increase comes in the advanced biofuel category via an increase in expected cellulosic ethanol. That also increased the expected advanced biofuel level to 4.9 billion compared with the proposed level of 4.8 billion gallons. No other changes to the proposed levels are expected, according to the report, with conventional ethanol held at 15 billion gallons and the 2020 biomass-based biodiesel mark maintained at 2.4 billion. EPA by law is set to release the final levels for the RFS by November the 30th, so an announcement is likely today. Because of a variety of factors around the globe, U.S.-grown wheat has now become a better buy in the global wheat market. Marcia Boswell takes a closer look at that on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The expected turn to U.S. wheat supplies appears to be underway. U.S. wheat exports to price-sensitive and to typically self-sustaining markets are on the rise due to increased price competitiveness. Fueling this demand for U.S. wheat is, in part, shrinking wheat supplies, especially of high-quality milling wheat, following decreased production in half of the world's major wheat exporters, including Australia, the EU, Russia, and Ukraine. The shrinking supplies in these countries have lifted their domestic and export wheat prices significantly over the past few months. At the same time, a large, high-quality crop pressured U.S. wheat prices lower, resulting in a convergence not seen for several years. According to International Grains Council data, FOB French wheat prices rose 11% or $23 per metric ton from the start of the 2018-19 marketing year beginning June 1st. Russian fourth-grade FOB wheat prices have increased $15 per metric ton, and Australian FOB wheat prices have increased an average $13 per metric ton. IGC data shows U.S. FOB wheat prices slipping an average 8% due to the large high-quality crop. As of November 22nd, IGC data shows U.S. wheat is now a better value than all the major competitor pairings. U.S. soft red winter is the best value milling wheat in the world at $216 per metric ton, $10 below Russian fourth-grade wheat. U.S. 11.5% pro hard red winter is valued at an average $3 per metric ton below French wheat. U.S. 14% pro hard red spring from the P&W is an average $4 below Canada Western Red Spring from Vancouver, and U.S. soft white from the P&W is an average $47 per metric ton, less than Australian wheat, which is now the most expensive wheat in the world due to the devastating drought they have suffered. The convergence in prices has resulted in increased sales of U.S. wheat as customers seek to secure supplies. Notably, on November 26th, USDA reported U.S. export sales of 120,000 metric tons of soft red winter to Egypt. The announcement followed an earlier public tender where U.S. wheat was the lowest offer. Coupled with earlier sales, U.S. wheat exports to Egypt now totaled 220,000 metric tons, almost double last year's and the highest level since 13-14. The U.S. has also shipped 64,000 metric tons of hard red winter to Saudi Arabia, with trade experts expecting additional demand from the country's recent optional origin tender. Despite the increased demand for U.S. wheat futures remain at or near marketing year lows, pressured by excellent winter wheat crop conditions and good soil moisture in the U.S. northern plains. It is rare for U.S. wheat prices to be in such a competitive position, which represents an excellent opportunity for customers to lock in their wheat futures price at these excellent levels. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and we'll be back after this. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we're glad to have across the way once again Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp, to cover the Kansas agricultural weather scene for us. Mary, you can offer now almost a full recap of the month of November here in Kansas, and the exception being today's conditions. But when you look back, what's the standout feature?
Standout feature was that it was cold and dry. We did have moisture, we did have snowfall, but it was about half of what we would typically expect to see in November. That's not going to be nearly the issue that it may have been in other years, because September and October were both wetter than normal, and indeed our September to November 30th precipitation total is above normal in all areas of the state. And statewide, we're running about 160% of normal for that period, with almost 4 inches to the excess. So again, having a little bit of a dry pattern in November is not as devastating as it might have been in other seasons.
Still not dry enough for producers yet with standing crops in the field, Mary.
No, and unfortunately, as cold as it has been, it hasn't been quite cold enough to freeze that top layer of soil to get some better access into the field. And in fact, our average temperature was 37.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Our departure from normal was just a shade under 5.5 degrees colder than normal for the month. We've ranged from temperatures as warm as 72 and as cold as 3. So quite a range in those temperatures. Most of the time when we had our coldest temperatures, we had snow on the ground. So again, that keeps that soil from freezing. When we looked at the Kansas Mesonet, I looked at the weekly totals yesterday, or the weekly averages, and they were above freezing. And not surprisingly, with some sunshine and warmer weather, we were seeing 2-inch soil temperatures in the mid-30s across the state. So again, we're not into that frozen ground, which would provide better field access yet.
But if one would like a talking point, you say it was the 10th coldest November on record.
Yes, it was. 10th coldest November on record, so it's in the books there. And today is not going to be warm enough to significantly shift that number. On the precip side, like I said, it was drier than normal, but it falls on the bottom end of the middle of the range, so it's not in the driest by any means. It's right there in the middle of the pack.
Well, briefly, Mary, reflecting on the blizzard of this past Sunday, and most of Kansas was adversely affected. You have numbers associated with that have been sent into the library.
Right. We had snowfall totals anywhere from 14 inches to trace amounts. It's important to note that with those winds, we had whiteout conditions across a good portion of the state, across I-70. North and south roads were also negatively impacted. Even areas that did not see a lot of snow accumulation had travel and visibility issues. We do have some winter weather advisories out for this weekend. Northwest Kansas may see a repeat of those blizzard-type conditions as the next system is projected to travel across our north in Nebraska, but it's likely to clip parts of the state.
In fact, you say that moisture may drape down over most of Kansas, maybe not in the form of snow, but definitely in the form of rain.
Right. As the system moves across the country, we are going to be on the warmer side of the front. And so, fortunately, it looks at this time like all of the precipitation in Kansas, or at least most of Kansas, is likely to be in the form of rain. And the good news is that this time they're still calling for it to be all rain rather than freezing rain. Producers and listeners will want to listen for the updates and watch, because it doesn't take much of a temperature shift to change that from rain to freezing rain. And again, it doesn't need to be a very significant event to produce a lot of slick conditions. So monitor that over the weekend and watch. As the system pushes out, we're looking for cold air to come in behind the system. We look into next week after it moves out, and it's not going to move out too quickly. We're looking at Monday being the exit point of it. It's going to be clear behind it, but it's going to be on the cold side with highs in the 30s. So that's still a little bit colder than we would typically expect as we enter into December.
And one particular note, you say what's called hydrological outlook has been posted for part of Kansas. What does that mean, and to where does it apply?
Well, a hydrological outlook is looking at the possibilities of flooding, and it's mainly applying to areas north central and northeastern Kansas where we've had a lot of moisture. We've got that melting snowpack to add to that, so additional rain is likely to put some of those streams out of the banks and into a flood condition. The amount of moisture is still uncertain, so that risk is also uncertain, which is why they're providing that hydrological outlook, and people should monitor that and look and see, because if the rains develop as some models indicate, it could easily go to a flood advisory or flood warning. Areas in particular are the Big Blue and the Vermilion. So look around and watch, and particularly if you're in an area that you know is prone to flooding, keep abreast of those changing conditions.
And then next week, dry and cold.
at least to start the week. We'll have to see if we're going to be on this roller coaster schedule of weekend storms. But at this point, it looks like most of the mid part of the week is going to be on the cold side, but dry.
And we'd leave folks with this. That National Climate Assessment came out earlier this week. A number of agencies contribute to that. And you've posted on the E-Update series a summary of that.
Right. Dr. Lynn, who is our state climatologist, was one of the authors for the Southern Plains portion of that assessment. And he has given a synopsis of the findings of that. And there are links there so you can go and check out the full report.
That's at agronomy.ksu.edu. The E-Update link right there toward the upper right-hand part of that page. Mary, we appreciate you coming over, and we'll talk again next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. That'll do it for this edition. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.